All right, now the Linux Jumpbox VM. So this is a little different of a setup from our Windows Jumpbox. We're using different approaches to configure the Linux Jumpbox. So let's go look at that. So the first thing that you'll notice is that I'm creating some data called a cloud config. And a cloud config is a file that you pass to cloud init that drives auto provisioning, auto configuration of a Linux VM once it wakes up in a cloud environment like Azure. And I'm going to pack multiple files into that cloud init config. I'm going to pack this YAML file called configure jumpboxlinux.yaml. So let's go look at that. Okay, so this is a cloud config, and it's basically, this is all YAML syntax specific to cloud init. And we're basically setting up how we're going to install software, okay, using apt. So here I'm going to say that we're going to use apt to install packages, and then I include my apt configuration. So with my apt configuration, this is where I'm going to define which packages I want to install on my Linux VM. So the first one I want to install is the Azure CLI, and you actually have to include the GPG key for it here for security reasons. So if that GPG key changes with, newer releases of the package, you'll need to update that in this configuration. So these are the lines of code that install the Azure CLI automatically on my Linux VM. These are the lines of code that install Terraform automatically on my Linux VM. See, HashiCorp's GPG key is pretty long. And here's the lines of code that install PowerShell automatically on my Linux VM. I also tell Cloud Init to go update everything. And then here's where I actually install those packages. Okay. The reason why I had to define those three packages above were they don't exist by default with Ubuntu. So these three were the ones I defined above. The rest of these are already defined in Ubuntu, and I don't have to. I didn't have to, define those packages. And then I tell it go ahead and reboot the VM if you need to, right here. So that's the YAML file. Go back to Jumpbox Linux. What else do we have? We have a shell script that we run. So we're packing that into our cloud config as well. So that's configure VM jumpbox linux.sh. So what does this shell script do? So this shell script actually domain joins the Linux VM to our Active Directory domain services domain so that we can log into our Linux box using Active Directory credentials. Okay, so you can see where I'm pulling some values. So passing values to this was challenging. And basically what I wound up doing was passing values to this using ARM tags. So I set some tags on the VM. Let's go look at that real quick. So if I go to the Azure portal, and some people might feel like this makes this a little fragile. I would agree. There's probably, less fragile ways of building this automation. But if we look at our virtual machines that were provisioned, here's Jump Linux 1. And you can see on Jump Linux 1, I've got a bunch of tags. Now, probably used to seeing the cost center tag, the environment tag, and the project tag. What are these other things? ADDS domain name and key vault. These are tags that I added specifically to this VM so that I can grab the values of those tags in this script that we're running here. Okay. So what I'm doing is the cloud init includes support for something Azure calls the instance metadata service. So the instance metadata service gives a VM the ability to ask questions about the environment that it's running in this case Azure. And Cloud Init has integrated support for the instance metadata service, right? So I was able very easily to go inspect this instance data.json here, which is already sitting on my VM thanks to Cloud Init, and I was able to pull the value of that tag and get the value of my key vault. Same thing with my domain name, mysandbox.local. Since I put that in a tag, I can easily read it from my instance data.json file, which Cloud Init handily provides me. Now we get into some fancy stuff where we're going to go ahead and use the instance metadata service to get access to a key vault. Okay. So we're going to do that to get some secrets, admin user and admin password. So how does that work? If we go look at Jumpbox Linux, you will see that I set up a system assigned managed identity for Jumpbox Linux. Okay. And what that does is it creates in Active Directory a special kind of identity associated with my virtual machine. Shows up under Enterprise Applications. You have to change the type here to Managed Identities. And there's our Managed Identity for Jump Linux 1. So by automatically creating a system assigned managed identity for this VM, I can then grant privileges for this VM to do things like pull secrets from Key Vault to configure itself, right? So how does that work? We previously set up an access policy for the Key Vault to make that possible. So if we look at our Key Vaults, this was all done using automation. You can see here that Jump Linux 1 has the privileges to get secrets by name from the Key Vault. So essentially what we've done here is we've removed the secrets from our code. We've securely stored them in Key Vault. And we're basically saying that this VM specifically has the ability to go grab secrets using its own system assigned managed identity. Okay. We were here. So we got the key vault, we got the domain name, and this is where we get the system assigned managed identity. So what we actually do here is this special IP address is a reserved IP address that is used for the instance metadata service for Azure. And I'm basically running this command to go get a token for the system assigned managed identity. Okay. I'm logged in. You know, that system assigned managed identity is logged in, and I get an access token from it. Okay. And then once I have that access token, I can use it to go do secure operations against Key Vault. So here's where we go get our admin user secret. Okay, we just call the Key Vault, and we this is where we do the get operation, and we pass it our access token to get the value of the secret that we want, and we store that value into admin username here. Okay. And here I echo out the value of the secret to the log file. And then the same thing for the admin password. In this case, I don't echo the password, I just echo the length of the password to the log file. All right, so we've got all of our configuration items that we need to domain join this Linux machine. So everything that follows is stuff that you have to do to domain join things. So the first thing we do is we update the hosts file. And we add the domain to the hosts file. We also need to update DHCP. We need to update the NTP, which is the network time protocol, to sync it up with the domain. We need to update the Kerberos configuration. We need to renew DHCP since we changed DHCP settings. And then once we do that, we can set up the privileged access management pieces. Join the domain here. We create a key tab file that we'll use to authenticate with Active Directory. We go ahead and register the VM with the DNS server. And we also configure dynamic DNS registration. So if the IP address changes, this computer should automatically go and update itself in DNS. And then finally, we create the privileged access management, which gives you the ability to log in to this machine using Active Directory credentials. Last bit is we update SSH so that it can also use Active Directory credentials for logging in. And we install this PyJot, I think it's called, Python Java Web Token library, which is required for pulling out things like object IDs out of a Java Web Token. We drop out. So using Cloud Init, we push a cloud config, we push a shell script that domain joins the machine, and we also push a shell script that configures PowerShell. So let's go see what that shell script does. So this script basically goes in and it sets up NuGet as our package provider for PowerShell. Okay. And it sets up PS Gallery as our repository. And it installs the Azure CLI, the Azure PowerShell module, and then it bails out. Okay, so basically we're automatically adding the Azure PowerShell module to PowerShell using this script. Right, so that's our cloud config. So how do we push that cloud config down to the Linux jump box? We do it with this command. Okay, so all these three files get stuck in a MIME file. And it's basically the same approach that you would use to add attachments to an email. That's what Cloud Init uses, right? So you create one file. It's going to be a a gzipped file, and it's going to be base 64 encoded. And inside that, it'll have 3 parts, these 3 files, right? And then those 3 files get pushed down to the Linux VM using this custom data. Okay? So, not too much else remarkable here. For the VM itself, name, resource group, location, size. Here we get our admin username from Key Vault. We don't use the admin password here because we do that using SSH, and that admin password's already been burned into our SSH key. Here's where we reference our NICs. We're also going to use platform orchestrated patching for this VM. And here's where we set up the SSH key for administrative access to the machine. Okay. So the username is going to be bootstrap admin. That comes from our Key Vault secret. And then the public key is here. The private key is actually required from the machine that does the connecting, right? And so we put that in Key Vault so we can use it to connect later. We could actually try that real quick, see if I can get it to work. I think Bastion lets us use private SSH keys from Key Vault. So what we're going to do is grab the value of our admin password secret. And if we go and find Jump Linux 1, we can connect to that using Bastion. And we want to just use Bootstrap admin, which is the local admin account. It's not a domain account. Okay, the SSH keys that we generated only work for the local admin account, not for a domain account. So we're going to do a private key from Key Vault. And we select our Key Vault. And we select our secret, which is Bootstrap admin SSH key private. Pop down this advanced key. We pass in the admin password as the SSH key phrase. And when you click connect, we now have an SSH session through Bastion to the local administrator account on Jump Linux 1. Now, this is not a domain joined account. Okay, so there's 2 ways to log into Jump Linux 1. One is through the local admin account, which I just showed you. The other is through the domain account, which we do from Jump Win 1 using remote SSH. Okay? Get rid of this. I think we can get rid of this. And we should be back to our documentation. And we were working on the Linux jump box. A little bit of an aside there. Sorry about that. Okay. Anything else to point out here? So, basically we use an Ubuntu image. This is the system assigned managed identity we use to go out and grab secrets from Key Vault from our cloud init scripts. And this is the cloud init configuration that we push down to that Linux VM to auto configure it. Then we, just define some NICs, and we define the access policy where we use the managed identity for the Linux VM to access secrets in Key Vault. Okay, without this access policy, that managed identity would not be able to go and get its secrets. Okay. All right, what's next? That's a lot with the Linux jump box VM.